On the 20th of February 1959, a search party was organised to help locate 9 missing hikers from the Kholat Syakhal mountain in the Ural Mountain Range of Siberia, known quite fittingly to the locals as the Mountain of Death. This search would lead to the military being called in to assist before the bodies of all 9 hikers were eventually found in suspicious, unexplained circumstances. But in the spring that followed this tragic event, medical examinations and inquests would prove to generate more questions than answers, and before long, the Dyatlov Pass incident became one of the biggest unsolved mysteries of the Soviet era. Something was definitely out of place in this event, but with no theory, from an avalanche to an unknown creature to the military coming close to answering all the impending questions, even 60 years on, nobody knows for sure what caused the hikers' untimely deaths. But in the midst of it all, we have to ask the question: could they have interrupted a secret Soviet weapons test? On January the 27th, 1959, Igor Dyatlov, a 20-year-old radio science engineer from the Ural Polytechnic University, prepared to lead a 10-man expedition 190 miles into the vast and unforgiving trail of the Ural Mountains. The group consisted of 8 men and 2 women, all of whom were Grade 2 certified hikers and were set to achieve Grade 3 soon after, being the highest level of qualified expeditionary experience. They were set to brave harsh conditions, with temperatures along the route regularly falling to extreme lows of around minus 30 degrees Celsius. The group was set to resurface around February the 12th and would send a telegram confirming their well-being. On the day of the expedition, 10th member Yuri Yudin had to withdraw from the trip due to knee and joint problems, which would leave him unable to trek long distances, an injury he would soon come to thank the gods for. Dyatlov told Yudin that he expected to surface sometime after the 12th, believing that the expedition would take slightly longer than was expected, and so when no word was heard from the group on the day, people assumed they had been delayed. On the 20th, however, with 8 days passed and still no word from the hikers, the Ural Polytechnic Institute organised a search party to look for the missing hikers, fearing the worst. With no luck and unable to cover much meaningful ground, the military was called in to assist with the search. It took a full month before anything was found, the only thing being their abandoned campsite, found significantly off the intended course Dyatlov had set out. The tents themselves were mysterious too, having been half torn down with their belongings, including shoes and weather protective clothing, still inside. The tents appeared to have been slashed from the inside too, indicating that the hikers had abandoned their tents without any protective clothing due to some unknown event, and this was further reinforced by the discovery of 9 tracks of mostly barefoot footprints in the snow. Diaries and cameras recovered from the campsite provided some insight into the trip. It appeared to have been going as planned up until February the 1st, but the day after, it seemed as if a heavy snowstorm had drawn them off course and they had veered into their now current location. By the time they realised, it would have been too late to turn back, so the group set up camp on the perilous Mountain of Death. Search teams followed the footprints for 1 mile into a nearby woodland area, where snow had covered the rest of the trail. It was in these woods that the bodies of the doomed hikers began to turn up. 5 of the missing crew members, including Igor Dyatlov himself, were found semi-naked and dressed in nightclothes. 2 were found by a fire, and the other 3 were found in positions that would suggest they had attempted to backtrack and return to the tent. But the darkness of the night had foiled them, and they had frozen to death. However, there were still 4 hikers left unaccounted for, and it took 2 months before they were found. It wasn't until the spring of 1959 and the seasonal melting of the snow that the 4 other campers were found, with their bodies being revealed from underneath a massive 13 foot of snow and ice. Unlike their counterparts, they were all found to be wearing clothes, specifically the clothes of some of their dead crew members. But on further examination, it was discovered that their clothes were showing signs of being slightly radioactive, also reiterated by their bronzed faces and slightly tinged hair colours. Whereas the first 5 had indisputably died of hypothermia, the deaths of the following 4 were less obvious, and so all 9 bodies were brought in for a medical examination. Dr. Boris Vozrozdeny worked on the medical examination and concluded that 6 of them had died of hypothermia, with 1 of the 4 recovered victims having also succumbed to the elements. But the other 3 had some incredibly strange, inexplicable injuries. 2 appeared to have sustained severe chest fractures. Vozrozdeny described their injuries as the result of being under severe pressure, but like the equivalent of a car crash, something no natural creature or event could have realistically inflicted. The last of the victims, Dubinina, was found with a cracked skull and, more worryingly, her eyes and tongue removed. However, a common misconception of this mystery is that they were ripped out. Instead, it was concluded that this was the result of natural putrefaction, given Dubinina was found lying face down in a stream some months after her death, which could have induced decomposition faster. This didn't, however, account for the skull fracture, and as was the case with the 2 chest fractures, the investigation was concluded that these 3 hikers died from an encounter with a compelling force. It was here that the investigation suspiciously ended, and details of the case were passed to a top-secret military Soviet archive. The area the campers were found in was named Dyatlov Pass in memorial, and the pass was closed off to hikers for a further 3 years. But what could have possibly crushed and killed these last 3 hikers in such a horrific manner, and why were they out of their tents in the dead of night and running away from something in the first place? Despite the unexplained details arising here and there, the initial theory was an avalanche. This would explain why the group abandoned their tent without dressing. If they could hear an avalanche coming in the dead of night, they would have tried to get away, and then the elements would have claimed them as they attempt to move back. A plausible theory to be sure, but one anomaly here is that the tree line around the campsite had not been damaged, and there were no signs that an avalanche had hit the area, and the group would have been running from nothing. Some then went on to conclude that they must have been running from something else, perhaps wild animals or tribal people, but the lack of any additional footprints strongly contradicted this. The next theory was popularised by conspiracy theorists and Western Bigfoot believers, and also by locals, who believed that the Menk, a type of fictional Russian Yeti, was to blame, as only this kind of fabled animal would have been able to injure the 3 final hikers with such force. A fictitious explanation, and there has been a distinctive lack of evidence, sightings, or anything to lend any credibility to this theory. It remained a popular theory due to Dubinina's injuries to the eyes and tongue, but as previously stated, these were deemed to be natural damages sustained over time. In 2013, Donny Ikar published a book on the incident named Dead Mountain, and he proposed an interesting new theory that answers many of the previously unknown questions. He explained that the wind going around the Kholat Syakhal mountain could create what is known as a Kármán vortex, a wind formation that is capable of producing infrasound. Infrasound could cause panic attacks and hysteria in humans, and is a similar principle used in up-and-coming methods of crowd control. He claimed infrasound would have likely woken the hikers, and they would have fled the scene, and by the time they had moved out of earshot of this wind and calmed down, it would have been far too dark to make their way back to the campsite. This would explain why Dyatlov and 2 others were found attempting to double back on themselves, and he also offered an explanation for the 3 pressure injuries, stating that these 3 likely fell off a ravine onto the ground below. Fairly compelling arguments issued for everything, but no explanation as to the radioactive nature of the clothes found on the final 3 victims. This leads us on to the widely believed theory that these hikers accidentally stumbled across some sort of secret weapons test or Soviet military experiment. The radioactivity could have been from a radioactive explosion nearby, driving the hikers from their tents, and then nature did the rest. It was reported by many locals and by a hiking team south of Dyatlov's crew that orange lights had been continually reported in the sky, including on the night of the 1st of February. Some claim that this gives rise to the theory of UFOs and extraterrestrial designs, but in 2008 a field of scrap metal was found near the pass, possibly from an ex-Soviet craft or weapon, strongly reinforcing the idea of a military test site near the location. Since the breakup of the Soviet Union, 37 alleged experts have claimed that the Soviets were conducting military tests and experiments in the area. Also, not long after the defamation of the Union, Lev Ivanov, the police chief in charge of the investigation, gave an interview where he admitted to concluding his investigation early on the orders of Soviet military personnel. Whatever the case, Soviets or aliens, one of the cameras recovered from the campsite appeared to show a photo which has been blighted by a large flash. While many have dismissed this as overexposure, it could provide some credibility to the light sightings in the area. The military theory is widely believed in some form or another by many, including by the 10th hiker Yudin, who believes the group were on the site of a radioactive explosion. While the idea of the Soviets shutting down the investigation and confiscating reports may sound compelling, however, former Soviet officials have claimed that this was standard procedure to conceal information at the time, and argued that by 1980, all of the relevant documents to the Dyatlov Pass incident were publicly available in some form or another. Therefore, while we cannot rule out the theory of a military test being the culprit, we most certainly cannot leap to the far-fetched government cover-up theories either. In 1999, the Dyatlov Foundation was created at Yekaterinburg with the help of Ural State Technical University, vowing to continue the investigation into the incident until someone could be held responsible. Until that time, a museum preserves the memory of the 9 hikers, and in 2016 a monument was commissioned on the site as a memorial to the incident. Regardless of the cause, it remains one of the most mysterious unsolved mysteries of the Soviet Union and raises bigger questions if the Soviet military conspiracy theories hold any validity. But with all that aside, these were 9 young, healthy students in the prime of their life who seemingly fell victim to bad luck, bad weather, and perhaps bad intentions. To this day, the Mountain of Death holds its name, and the pass now has a much more sinister reputation due to the events of that fateful night. But whatever the case, it's likely that, with the dismantling of the Soviet Union, the wind whistles round the mountains quietly, and the pass is unable to take the lives of any more innocent people. So, a freak avalanche, an unknown creature, a military accident, or something more sinister? It is very likely that nobody from the public will ever know for sure, but in all likelihood, someone from that era probably did know the truth behind what happened to those poor hikers. But for now, the pass is quiet, and the mystery is a case as cold as the snow that falls in the same place. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you did enjoy the video. If you did, please leave a like on it, and if you're new around here, click the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you can be notified when new documentaries are released. Thanks a lot guys, I'll see you all soon.